Hello everyone and welcome to the randomness in Gdevelop tutorial. In this video it will be a very short tutorial, but I will be teaching you how to make randomness in Gdevelop because randomness is very important in a lot of video games so you can make things more fun, or maybe you want to add just a little more luck and a little more excitement to your game. I'll be showing you how to do that. So let's start with the basic randomness. Basic randomness is just choosing a random number, because as we call it in game development and computer science, it's called RNG, and what we're doing is we're randomly generating a number. That's what RNG stands for. It stands for random number generation. So how do we do just a basic command of randomness? Now before we do that, of course I'm going to quickly set up a platformer. I'm going to a player. I'm going to quickly set this up. You can set this up as well to test it out. I'm just going to add a sprite here and choose a file from my pictures, and I'm going to choose a file, and once I choose that file, I'm just going to, let me go find, I have some of my folders around here, but we're just going to choose a file just to have some things set up, and just to have some things set up that we can use. So here it is, the player. Finally found my player sprite. I'm just going to quickly give it a behavior object of a platformer character, hit apply. I'm also going to add another object and call this object the ground because our player needs something that we can stand on. And I'm going to quickly add a ground sprite as well and give it the behavior of a platform object. And if I just quickly drag both of these onto the scene, I can see that we have a player object and a ground. So now that we have this, how do we actually make a randomness command? Now this event that I'm about to show you can be used for a variety of uses, not just what I'm about to show you. So first of all, we want to be able to activate this random number generation. So how do we do this? In this case, we can use many conditions. Like I said, this is very flexible. I'm just teaching you how to fundamentally use it. We're going to use a keyboard press to activate the random number generation. So in this case, I'm going to use R, the R key. And if R key is pressed, I want to trigger once. It's important. You have to use trigger once correctly when dealing with randomness, or it will keep generating random numbers while you're holding it. So you have to make sure that you know how to use trigger once. Trigger once basically makes sure that when you press the button, that command will only be triggered once until you get off of the button and then press it again. If you don't have trigger once while you're holding the button, the command will still be getting, the action will still be getting used, so it'll keep repeating and repeating, and that's not what we want in this case. So you have to understand trigger once while true. So now that we have this R key is pressed, trigger once, finally we get into the randomness. So when we're going through randomness, we actually have to have a variable when dealing with random numbers, because I can see there's no just random action here of just choosing something random. Like if I type random, we could pick random objects, we could do things like that, but it's not going to actually do anything. Like, it's not going to actually do anything because that's not what we want. So how do we actually pick a random number? Now we need to make a variable. Now when we're dealing with randomness, most of the time we want this to apply to like the whole scene. We want the entire scene to be able to access this. So we make a scene variable, and to do that you go into this project manager here, you go into your scenes and you click the three dots and you click edit scene variables, and let's add a scene variable and make sure it's a number, because a number, like I said, is random number generation. We can choose random numbers, and that's what the random event is for. It's for numbers. So I'm going to call this RNG1. I'm just going to really call it RNG in this case, and we're going to have it set equal to 0. I'm going to hit apply. Now I'm going to go into this event, and we're going to go into other actions and go into variables, scene variables, change number variable. Now the variable we want is RNG, so we click RNG. We want to set it equal to, because adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, that's not what we want to do in this case. You could do it for some type of math game if you want to choose a random number, then add something to it. But in this case, we want to set equal to. And how do we actually access random? Now you want to first and foremost type random. And when you type random, you'll see that we have random number, we have random float, we have random float in range, random in range, random with step. We're going to be covering, basically I'll be talking about all of these except for random with step, because when I used it, I didn't really see the difference between using random and random with step. So we're not going to be doing that one, but you can investigate it on your own. I always encourage that. Now we have random number, which is what we want. Now, when you're using random number, all you have to do is set a maximum value. Now, you may think, won't this choose a lot of numbers, like negative numbers? No. Random will not choose negative numbers. It will only go from 0 to the maximum value. So if I choose random number 10, it will be able to access 11 numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 11 numbers because that includes 0. So if you wanted something to have a 10% chance of happening, you would put random 9. And then you can choose like for which number you want the event to actually happen. So let's say I'm going to make this have a 20% chance of happening, or a 25% chance of happening. So I'll only give it 4 options by putting random 3. So it'll be choosing from numbers 0 through 3. Now that we have this, I could preview the scene, of course, but we haven't made an action. We have not made an action, so we're choosing a random number, but it's not doing anything. So this is where the action comes in. So we add a new event, and we want to make it so if it's equal to a certain number, then like we do an action. And the number I'm going to choose is 3. So I'm going to add condition, other condition, variables, scene variables, number variable. If RNG is equal to 3, that's the condition. And I'm going to add an action. I'm going to, in this case, we're going to delete the ground. We're going to delete the ground. So I'm going to just type in delete when I click into my ground. And let's preview the scene. Now, this has a 25% chance of happening since there's only 4 possible numbers. So let's see what happens. I'm pressing R right now. I press R. Nothing happened. I'm going to press R again. And it happened on the second try because there's a 1 out of 4 chance of it happening, so it's not that rare. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to press R. I pressed it once, pressed it twice, pressed it 3 times, nothing happened. Pressed it 4 times, nothing happened. This is just probability, so it's not guaranteed to happen within 4 attempts. Press it again. It happened on that 5th attempt. So on average, it happens every 4, about every 4 times, but it's not guaranteed to happen because that's not how probability works. It's not based on the previous test. I pressed it 2 times, pressed it 3 times, pressed it 4 times. I pressed it 5 times, pressed it 6 times, pressed it 7 times, pressed it 8 times, pressed it 9 times. That time it took even 9 attempts. But on average, it'll be about 4. So now that's random, that's just the basic random. So how do we do other things? Now there's another way to accomplish things that you want, because you may not want to do a random and just a maximum value. And that's why we have random float. Random float, you can just be a little bit more specific with random float. I can make it 3.5. But the thing is, with random float, it might never choose the number I want. So I'm pressing R. So you have to be really careful when doing a random float, because remember, when you're dealing with floats, there are a lot of possible values. So the values that you use have to be very small, because as you see, I'm pressing R a bunch, and it's not ever picking the exact number because there's so many float possibilities, because floats are the same as decimals. So when you're using random float and range, make sure the numbers have very small differences, because there's so many possible values that the chance of you getting a whole number is close to none. So let's X out there. So random float and range, we're not going to be going over that really too much because it's not that useful, because like I said, the chance of you getting one of those numbers very low. So let's go into random number in range, which is called random in range. And as you see, it has 2 parameters here. We have minimum number and the maximum number. So let's put the minimum number, the minimum number it can have is 2, and the maximum it can have is 10. And let's make it so if RNG is, we're going to keep it if it's equal to 3, it's going to still delete the ground. So now it's only choosing numbers from 2 to 10, nothing under and nothing over 10, nothing under 2 and nothing over 10. So we're going to test this out as well. And like I said, this is quite similar to random regularly, but this has more flexibility. I'd recommend you use random in range because it can do everything that random does and more. So really, you should always be using random in range. It picked it on my 3rd attempt. So that's how you do basic random selection. Now, how do you do a little bit more, like a little bit different things with random? Now, we showed you something else. You saw something else earlier, and it was picking a random object. So I'm going to keep this event here if R key is pressed. I'm going to go into the action and put other action. I'm going to search up random, and pick a random object. And the object is going to pick, it can pick a random object from ground. And what it's going to do after that, it's going to pick a random object from ground, and I'm going to drag this in here, and then it's going to delete the ground. I think this is how it works. Honestly, one of my first times testing it out. This is quite new. So I'm going to get several ground objects. I'm going to duplicate these. But object picking it may work a little bit different. I sometimes just type things out just for the fun of it. As you can see, it didn't delete the top one. It deleted a random one, so it picked a random one. Now delete that second layer, and we know that the last one left is that last layer. So it will pick a random one every time you press it. So in this case, it deleted the top layer first, then it deleted the bottom layer, then it deleted the third layer. So if you want to ever pick a random object out of many objects and activate a certain event to that object, that's how you do it. So that's how you do random object picking. Now, how about random timers? Something more practical. How about if I want something to happen randomly? I want something to happen randomly at random intervals and random times. How do we do that? Now, it's actually quite easy to do that, and I'm just going to show you how to do that for a second. Now, random interval timings are very interesting. They're used a lot in games, so especially in runner games. And actually, I'm going to show you how to do this with a random runner tutorial. This is an application that we're going to use randomness for. This is an example, and this is going to be the last part of the tutorial, an example of what you can use randomness for in an actual runner game. So I'm going to make a basic runner, and we're going to make it so the player cannot move horizontally. So I'm going to add a condition, and I'm going to put, no condition, always. I'm going to put player, ignore, default controls, yes, and then I'm going to add a new event. If space key is pressed, I'm going to go to keyboard, key press, I'm going to put space. If space key is pressed, trigger, there's no need to put trigger once here. If space key is pressed, we're going to make the player jump. The player is going to simulate a jump. So we're going to put simulate jump key pressed. And if I preview my game now, if I try to move left and right, nothing happens, but I can still jump. So that's how a lot of 2D runners work. You can't actually move your player. The only thing that's moving is the objects in the background. So let's make some objects that can actually kill the player. So I'm going to add a new object, add a sprite, and call these death blocks. And add a new animation. And let's add a sprite, add a blue cube. Life is death blocks. This is all it's about. Life is death blocks. So we have these death blocks right here, and I'm going to make them just kind of big so we actually have to jump over them. And we're going to be spawning these in random positions. Well, not really random positions. We could do that some other time, really. I'm just showing the fundamentals of it. But we're going to be testing out our random timer feature, and we're going to be spawning these in 3 locations. We're going to be spawning these in this location, and this location. I'm going to set all of their x values to be equal to the same. They all start off screen, and let me set this equal to 192 right here, and this is going to be the 3 locations. Now we have to do a random interval timer. Well, another thing we have to do before that, add a new event, add a condition. If player is in collision with the death blocks, we want to delete the player. So the player, it basically just simulates dying. So I'm going to click into my player and click delete and click OK. And we know this works. I'll test it out when we actually have it. But we need to actually have a random interval that we want to repeat in a random amount of seconds each time. But we can get an extension to make this easier so we don't have to manually use timers. We could manually use timers. It just makes it much, much more complicated. So I'm going to use an extension here, and it's called repeat every X seconds. Use it, always download it into your project. It's very useful because dealing with timers in Gdevelop can add a lot of extra complications of things for no reason. So just use that extension whenever you can. So I'm going to add a new event and add a condition here. I'm going to go into other conditions and repeat every X seconds. Now we have to give the timer a name, and you have to put it in quotation marks as a string name. So I'm going to name this timer random timing. Of course, I'll recommend you put something short as a name. And the time in between seconds. Now you see that we can put numbers here, but we can also use random here. So I'm going to put random in range, and the maximum I want is 0, because there's going to be 3 possible options, and then the minimum I want is 2. So it can only choose between 3 numbers, 0, 1, and 2. And now we want this to, I want to trigger once. Well, not trigger once. It doesn't have to trigger once because, well, actually it really does, because it's still doing that action. We'll see it later. I don't think it does have to trigger once. You have to really be careful with this trigger once. Now, is repeating a random amount of time. It could be every 1 second. It could be random every 2 seconds. It could be every 3 seconds. It could be any of those timings. But what we want to do here is set our RNG number, set our RNG value to either 0, 1, or 2. So I'm going to go into variables, scene variables, change number variable, RNG equal to random is also going to be random in range. Actually, let's use random here just to kind of flex our knowledge here. I'm going to use random, and we want 3 possible values, so I'm going to put random number and then put 2. So that's the same as our random in range, 0 through 2. And I'm going to add 2 conditions. Well, just one really. I'll copy and paste the other ones. So we want to put if RNG is equal to 0, we want to spawn our player at this position right here, this lowest position, 129, 1292, and 417. So I'm going to spawn it here, and we want to make sure this is trigger once, or it'll keep spawning it. So we want to create our death blocks, create the object at X position 1292, and then Y position 417. And I'm going to copy and paste this and put different values for each of them. So we need to paste this 2 times, paste, and then paste it one more time. Instead of putting RNG 0, we put RNG equals 1, and for this we put if RNG equals 2. Let's look at the other values. We have the same X and 318 as our Y value there, 318. And for the last one, let's see, up here we have 223. So I'm going to put 223. Now, when we play the game, let's see what happens. Now, they're going to be coming quite quickly. Oh, I forgot, they're not moving yet. We have to set one more condition. And it's going to be an always condition, which means we put no condition, a blank condition here. And death blocks, we just going to make it so the X position is always moving to the left every frame. So we're going to put subtract since we want to move to the left. We're going to make it move to the left by 10 pixels every frame. And this will just make it move. So, okay, they're spawning now. And as you see, they're spawning really, really, really fast. They're spawning extremely, extremely, extremely fast. Because we're setting this to so many numbers at once. So I'm going to put trigger once because it's spawning much faster than I expected. And it's just still spawning really fast. So, like, you have to have control over it. So instead of putting random in range, because I forgot, it's random in range of 0. Which means sometimes it's spawning in literally 0 seconds, less than a second. So I'm going to put random in range of 1 and 2 seconds. Because you have to be careful with that with random in range. And let me get rid of those first 3. Let's get rid of those first 3. And preview. And they're not going to be stretched out because we have to make it so it's like that. And see, they're spawning at random positions. They're not always spawning at the same position. They're not always spawning in the same interval. Like, as you can see, they're spawning differently. If I run this again, they're not spawning at the same interval every time. So it's either spawning at 1 through 2 seconds. And to make sure you can know this is working, I can put more values here, like 1 through 5 seconds. So sometimes there'll be a really long wait, and sometimes there won't be a really long wait. So I say they're spawning quite consistently right now, spawning basically within the same interval. And then there's a wait, and then it spawns again. So that's how randomness works in Gdevelop. These are the fundamentals of randomness. You can use this randomness for enemies. We showed you how to pick objects, and you can use this randomness for quite literally whatever you want in your games. And there's also more things you can do in randomness. Those are fundamentals that will allow you to do whatever you need in randomness. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and comment down below because it really helps me out. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, as well as 4,000 hours of watch time. So all the subscribers and all of the views and watch time helps if you do enjoy my content. And also make sure you stay tuned for all of my new content that comes out about bi-weekly. I'm trying to get a true schedule, but it comes out several times a month. Stay tuned for my 3D content as well as some extra content that will be here in the future. I want to thank you all for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.